Hello.
And let me once again welcome everybody officially to today's online event, Sex Trafficking, Best Practices to Combat Demand. Today's event is sponsored by the Harvard Kennedy School's Initiative to Stop Human Trafficking and the Government Innovators Network. And I'd like to begin by issuing the first of a couple of polls that we have today. And you should see the poll in front of your screen, and you can simply click on the option that best applies to you. And you can see we have a couple of groups watching from one screen. We'll be administering polls throughout the event today, and there won't be any verbal cue to that. The polls will just come up, and anytime you see one get posted, you can just go ahead and click on the option that most suits you, and you will see those results as they tabulate. I'll allow another couple seconds for people to finish. All right, thanks very much. And at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Christina Bain from the Carr Center for Human Rights.
Thank you, Jim. I want to thank the Ash Institute for co-sponsoring this event today. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your afternoon to participate in this online conference. And just to give you a few words about our trafficking initiative here at the Carr Center, our initiative is something that not only will educate and develop best practices through Harvard-based lectures and global conferences like this, but also provide connections and information sharing for anti-trafficking policymakers and future public policy leaders around the world. So thank you for joining us today. And today I'd like to dedicate our conference to Norma Hotaling, who is the founder and director of SAGE in San Francisco and a former panelist from one of the first online conferences, I believe, sponsored by the Ash Institute. Norma has truly shaped the dialogue on demand-based strategies and has been a leader in combating commercial sex trafficking. She's been a pioneer in the creation of the John School model and has been a passionate advocate on behalf of so many victims and survivors. As Norma battles a critical illness, our thoughts and prayers go out to her today. And now I'd like to introduce our conference moderator, Michael Shively, who is a senior associate for the Center on Crime, Drugs, and Justice at Apt Associates, Inc., here in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Well, thank you very much, especially for holding this and for saying a word about Norma and for assembling this panel and providing the infrastructure to do this conference. I've been a senior associate at Apt Associates for about 7 years. It's a private research company in Cambridge, Mass., and my involvement in trafficking research is fairly recent. I've only been studying it directly for about 3 years. I was fortunate enough to lead an evaluation of the first offender prostitution program that Norma helped to start in San Francisco, and that evaluation ended last April. And I'm currently just in the beginning phases of a national overview of best practices and kind of a descriptive overview of demand reduction practices in the United States. Now, before we get to our other panelists, I just want to provide a little bit of context. There are many different ways to look at prostitution and sex trafficking, but I think it's a worthwhile exercise at least. To view it as a market that is like most other markets, which is, it can be divided into supply, demand, and distribution. So in prostitution and sex trafficking, the distributors are the pimps and traffickers. The supply is really the supply of survivors or victims. These would be people serving as prostitutes or victims of commercial sexual exploitation. And the demand, that is created by the customers. And this has been generally kind of an understudied and underpursued strategy. Typically, I can't speak globally, but at least within the United States, it's been far more typical to focus on the providers of commercial sex as the offenders, criminal offenders, and to basically pursue a punishment approach to them. On occasion, you'll see an emphasis on going after pimps or traffickers. That's still relatively rare. And it's a fairly recent phenomenon to even give any thought to going after the customers of commercial sex in the United States. So the way I think of it anyway is not that demand is more important, but I certainly, because the other things have to be pursued. Unless we envision prostitution and sex trafficking as disappearing soon, there will always be a need to focus on rescuing and supporting and people who are victimized, and also to go after the people responsible for it. But I do think of demand as the cause and the other two things as symptoms. And I would imagine that if you could rescue every victim today and lock up every pimp or trafficker today, that the system would basically replicate itself in a fairly short amount of time, as long as there is demand, because that drives it. So what is demand? Well, demand for commercial sex is the root of both what we think of as just prostitution, localized prostitution, and human trafficking for the purposes of sexual exploitation. There have been many studies done of this. This is not something that we don't know much about. And if you pick, your favorite 10 or 20 studies of this, and you extract the top dozen reasons, they look something like this. Now, I've imposed these divisions. I've imposed this typology on it. This is not written in stone, and there are different ways of looking at this, but still I think it's a useful exercise. And one of the things that's useful about grouping them is that you can see that some of the sets of needs, the motivations, what men are trying to accomplish or get by pursuing commercial sex, it's apparent that some of these are completely conflicting. And this is important when we think about interventions and treatment, because clearly one size does not fit all in terms of intervening with the men that drive the sex business. The first group, you can see there are men that are basically looking for intimacy, and in commercial sex markets, it's well known that the girlfriend experience is basically paying someone extra to pretend that they actually care about the person and go through some of the motions of having an actual relationship is one of the things that men will pay a premium for. Some men seek emotional support. Some men cite that they just don't have much success seeking relationships and sex conventionally. So it's basically kind of the profile of a needy, lonely person that's looking for companionship, and part of that is sex. Then there's a type that comes up frequently in this research, which are the distant men, the people who absolutely don't want emotional involvement. They don't desire it. What they want is sex, quickly, easily, and without the entanglements of a relationship. Another group you could call thrill seekers, or men that actually part of the allure of commercial sex is the fact that it is illegal or illicit. Some of the men want things that most people won't do voluntarily without being paid to do it sexually. And some men are just looking for different traits. They want women of different sizes, shapes, ethnic heritages, and things like that. And a fourth group are what I would call the scary guys, the bad guys, the sociopaths or the misogynists. And these are men who are motivated in part or in whole by wanting to do harm. They want to control, to dominate, to harm, or to humiliate the person that they pay for. And some of them want to act out scary or illegal acts that they don't want to get caught for doing it in another way. For example, they'll pay young women or women to act as if they're little girls, or act as if they're their daughter, or something else that could get them in a lot of trouble for. But this is basically demand, and I think to take seriously the concept of trying to interrupt demand requires careful and thoughtful attention to the actual motivations. Now, I've heard people that are involved in the anti-trafficking movement basically use throwaway lines by saying, well, basically the men can just seek sexual gratification by themselves. They could masturbate, and that would basically solve it. And I think that is not a very thoughtful or effective idea, because that option has always been open to these men, and they've chosen not to pursue that. and that there's a lot more than just sexual contact or release that is driving the men. Now, in terms of intervening, trying to attack demand, there are several things that we know have been occurring for some time or occurring in more than one place. Law enforcement basically is in charge of doing most of this, or they're in the lead and pursuing most of the demand reduction strategies. So the things that we know about are that the starting point for demand reduction is doing street level or web-based sting operations. That is the most commonly used tool to go after demand, is to intercept and arrest mostly men that are attempting to purchase sex. Now, there is no data collection effort that's been ongoing. There aren't official statistics. There really isn't any place to go to try to find out how widespread these efforts are, what they look like, how they vary, how long they've been around. So in our research we've been doing at APT, we've been just compiling lists with really low-tech, just web searches and phone calls and literature reviews. And we know of, in the United States, 536 different communities that have done reverse stings. And reverse stings are basically the street-level operations where a woman, who's usually a female police officer, poses as a prostitute and then gathers the evidence they need with men soliciting them for purchase sex, and then they can make an arrest. About 100 communities that we know of have done web-based versions where they'll post on a website that is usually Craigslist. They'll post a fake ad, rent a hotel room, have a female police officer serving as a decoy, and then again they'll just wait for the guys to come, say the right things or the wrong things, and then make arrests. Another strategy that's pretty widespread is different ways of trying to shame or use shame to deter men from doing this. So often that's posting in the newspapers or releasing to news outlets the names and sometimes photos and sometimes other information about men that they arrest for soliciting sex. Some communities have posted billboards. Some police departments have web pages devoted to showing the photos and identities of the men that they arrest. Another approach is not as widespread, but it's still something that's been in use, which is they sometimes are called Dear John letters. These are letters sent home, and sometimes it's based on a neighborhood or community member sighting of a car. So they'll give that to the police and say, I saw, a woman, a prostituted woman get into that car in my neighborhood on such and such a date. And then they'll send a letter to the registered owner of the vehicle and saying this car was seen and suspected of being involved in prostitution. The intent there is to get home pressure of a wife or a girlfriend or someone else to bear on the person. About 70 communities that we know of have seized autos of the men that are caught soliciting sex. There's something else sometimes called a SOAP order, or SOAP, stay away from areas with prostitution, or another way to think of them is just geographic restraining orders, where men who have been arrested are told for some period of time that they can't be seen in a certain area that's been known for prostitution. Some fairly rare occurrences that we found of community service programs for Johns, or surveillance cameras that specifically mention targeting the men and not the providers of commercial sex. A fairly rare occurrence also is public awareness campaigns. So these are just widely broadcast messages meant to educate the public and reach some of the people who may end up soliciting. And we're fortunate to have someone on the conference today, Stephanie Davis, who works for the City of Atlanta, which has been an innovator in that regard. Another approach that's received a lot of attention, and for good reason, and it's a very interesting approach, which is education or treatment for the men that are caught soliciting. These are the common terms, John schools. And again, when we started wondering or asking how widespread is this, how many are there, we had heard of about 8 or 10 or 12, and we really couldn't find anyone to say that they thought there were more than 20 in the United States. But we ended up finding that there were 43, and one of the first ones, not the first one that I know of, but one of the first ones is the First Offender Prostitution Program in San Francisco. Norma Hotaling of SAGE, or Standing Against Global Exploitation, the police department and the district attorney's office partnered to create that program in 1995. And since then, there have been over 40 have been implemented, and these programs are also starting to be seen abroad. I put together this map. It's not a thing of beauty, but it's just a low-tech map showing in the United States the prevalence of John's education programs. The red dots represent programs that, as far as I know, are currently active. The yellow dots are sites that I know are considering or have considered or are actively planning, programs. The green dots are things I would not call a John school because they're really not a broad-based educational intervention approach, but they simply have a health education component. And there are roughly a dozen of those. And then the black ones are discontinued John schools. So these are sites that have had one that is no longer working. Now, one of the things that's fascinating about the programs and very encouraging looking forward is that there really has been very little federal initiative to drive this. There's been very little grant money devoted to this. This is essentially a grassroots movement, and the people in San Francisco and SAGE are definitely some of the key drivers of this becoming widespread. Often programs that are innovative pop up because there's a grant, and once the grant goes away, or the charismatic, passionate core people behind it move on or burn out, a lot of programs just fade away and die. But it's really fascinating that so many of these programs, over 80% of the ones that have started have been sustained. And I think one of the reasons is that if they're structured properly, and most of them are, they can pay for themselves. I'm going to yield the floor to our guests in a second, but if you'd like, I could, if anyone wants to, pose the questions, I can come back and provide more details about this. But I just wanted to provide a context and some overview. And the guests that we have on the conference today, the first one that will speak is Donna Hughes. And Jim, are you going to switch the slides, or is this something I do? There's Donna's bio. Donna Hughes is one of the people who has, without question, been way out front on the issue of looking at demand. Her, Norma Hotaling, Michael Horowitz, Melissa Farley, you could put together a handful of people that have really created the term demand reduction and really helped to frame the issue in the way that it's really been effective. She's an endowed chair at Women's Studies program at the University of Rhode Island, and you can see, I don't need to read her bio for you, but she is, when I got our project 3 years ago to evaluate the First Offender Prostitution Program, the key piece of literature I had for our literature review, and the starting point was some of the writing that Donna Hughes had done on demand, and that really got the ball rolling. So I would like to hand off to Donna.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for organizing this. This is the first time I've taken part in one of these conferences, and I'll see how it goes. It seems a little strange to be sitting here doing all this talking, just staring at my computer screen rather than being able to see an audience. Okay, can I have the first slide? Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about the model that Michael introduced, talking about the supply side of sex trafficking. We know that there are a supply of victims, and that the supply of victims is created by what enables easy recruitment. If women are poor, if there's unemployment, if they develop trust in a boyfriend or a family member who can offer them a better life. These are the kind of elements that make recruiting victims easy for perpetrators. There is a lot of focus on supply of victims through prevention and awareness programs. But it's been my belief that if we want to get at what is sort of the root of trafficking, what is the driving force behind trafficking, we have to look at the demand for victims, and that this is where the process begins. Because you will never completely dry up the supply of victims. There's always going to be vulnerable people looking to take risks for a better life. And then I characterize the demand in a little different way than Michael did. He focused on the demand being just the men who purchase the sex acts. I think there's actually 4 levels of demand, and that each one of them has to be combated in order for us to sort of reduce the demand. The first one of those is men who purchase the sex acts, which is Michael has already addressed those. And these are men who are
This service is provided by freeconferencecall.com. Please enter your conference access code followed by the pound key. This menu will repeat. You entered 227582. If this is correct, press 1. To re-enter your access code, press 2. There are 78 other callers on the call. At any time, press star 4 for conference instructions. Please announce yourself.
Which are the profiteers. These are the people that are involved in sex trafficking because they're making money. They're not necessarily interested in buying sex acts. They're after the money. And these are the sex traffickers, the pimps, the corrupt officials, because we know that without corruption, the large part of trafficking could not continue to exist. They have gotten a lot of attention in discussions about trafficking. And we need to understand what they are doing as a business so that we can learn to interrupt their business. The third factor of the demand are the laws and government policies, especially in destination countries. If there are government policies or practices that have come to tolerate the sex industry, that legalize the sex industry, that sees it as a victimless crime, and that as long as the women are off the streets and in massage parlors somewhere, they just sort of let it go because it's a victimless crime. Those are the kind of things that are creating demands for victims. And whether they are consciously doing this or not, they're facilitating the demand for victims that are drawing more and more women and girls into this. So if we want to be able to reduce the demand, we're going to have to start looking at the laws and government policies. And then the final factor of the demand are the culture that legitimizes the sex trade. My younger students know all about pimping and how cool pimping is. Many of us have seen Hollywood movies for years that glamorize prostitution. And these are the kind of things that are creating a norm within our culture that people think, well, there's just no harm to it, or isn't it sometimes empowering for women? And we're going to have to tackle those things as well. Okay, next slide. Do I do this, or? Oh, okay. Okay. And
yeah, for future reference, you can do that if you like,
okay.
just using your mouse cursor.
Yeah, okay, fine. Okay, we look at strategies to combat sex trafficking, and I think we need to adopt an abolitionist approach. And an abolitionist approach is one in which we distinguish between who's a perpetrator and who is a victim, and then we treat them accordingly. Currently, we have a prohibitionist approach at the state and local level where we criminalize everyone, saying that they're all criminals, they all should be arrested. And we know that that law has been applied in a discriminatory way against women, with often women being 90% of the women, 90% of the people who are arrested. Pimps are often less than 1% of the prostitution-related arrests. Another approach, of course, is the legalization approach, where you turn prostitution into a service, sexual services, and men become clients. But I think that we need to have an approach that's really more like the battered women's movement, in which we said there is a perpetrator here and there is a victim. It's not just a family fight. And police officers had to learn, how do you go into a call and determine who is the perpetrator here and who's the victim. And then, of course, you treat them accordingly, which is services for the victims and prosecution for the perpetrators. I think that's the way we have to proceed from now on, which requires some changes in the approaches that we do. Okay, I want to talk about each of those four factors of the demand and what we can do to combat them. First of all, the men who purchase the sex acts. We have to make them accountable for their behavior. That's what we learned to do with batterers, and that is that they were held accountable. We need to charge men who buy sex from minors with felony crimes like child sex abuse, sexual assault of a minor, statutory rape. We know that there is zero tolerance for men who molest children in our neighborhoods. If they're Boy Scout leaders, if they're priests, if they're teachers, if there's the uncle in the family, we have zero tolerance for it. And that is an attitude that has evolved. And we have to have that kind of an attitude towards the men who are buying sex as well. In fact, if the way the situation is now, if a man wants to molest or have sex with an underage child, the best thing he can do is go buy the sex, because the victim is more likely to be arrested than he is. So we have to change that, and we have to get tough with the charges against the men. Okay, in combating the demand, the second factor, the profiteers, the sex traffickers, the pimps, the corrupt officials, we have to develop a zero tolerance policy for them. And say that this is just not going to be tolerated in our community. We have to investigate and prosecute all criminal activity, not just the most serious or the most egregious. And we need to combat the illegal sex trade in our communities. Most of what is involved is illegal. It's criminal. And not just trafficking, but prostitution-related activities is not legal. And at this point, it is often advertised in public places, in the yellow pages, on the internet, and we have to reverse that if we're going to combat the demand for those that are making money from this. Okay, the third factor in combating the demand are the government policies and practices. And we have to have zero tolerance for corruption. We know that widespread sex trafficking could not exist without corruption or tolerance for the sex trade. We need to enforce existing anti-pimping and anti-trafficking laws. There are a lot of laws that have existed for a long time, and new anti-trafficking laws. All of these need to be enforced. We need to revise state anti-pimping laws. In all the discussion about sex trafficking and the need for new state anti-trafficking laws, we tend to forget that every state in the United States and most countries around the world have anti-pimping laws, and we need to use them. If they may need to be updated, these offenses need to be made into felony crimes, and we need to increase the penalties. But those are all things that the government, whether it be a federal government, state, or local government, can do to combat the demand for victims. And then finally, we have to change the culture. I had already mentioned making men accountable. We need to stigmatize the buying of sex acts, and we need to stigmatize pimping. And if you think that's tough, a lot of people tell me, "Oh, come on, Donna, you're never going to get rid of this." I know, it's criminal activity. I don't know of any criminal activity we've completely abolished. But just remind you that there are things like drunk driving, domestic violence, smoking, and think about how we've changed the culture over the last 2 or 3 decades of these activities. They're just not socially acceptable anymore, and we've gotten tough policies on them and increased penalties in the law for some of these things. And that's what we have to do to change the culture. We need to, particularly young people, challenge their idea that pimping is cool and to start stigmatizing these behaviors. Okay, I think I have a couple other slides for further discussion, but I'm going to stop here and turn this over to the next person. Thanks for bearing with me. I found this a little bit difficult to just sort of keep talking while looking at the computer.
Well, I thought it went fine or terrific.
Okay.
Thank you, Donna. Is Lavonnie Bickerstaff on yet? Apparently not. One of the speakers today is Lavonnie Bickerstaff. She's a sergeant with the Pittsburgh Police Department who was the key person to implement a John School program. And she was, we were really interested in having her present because she does not come from an academic, research background. She's basically, a frontline sort of troops that are implementing these kinds of programs, and she could provide a nitty-gritty, real-world kind of view of what it takes, the sort of challenges she's faced, and just what it takes to get a John School going. And one of the things that we've all encountered, that as we've spoken with Lavonnie, I've been talking with her off and on a couple of years, is you can rarely have a conversation with her without her saying, "Oops, hold on a second," and saying, "Oh, there's a robbery, oh, there's an assault." She is a working police officer whose day job is a priority. So she is not on the call right now. She may join us later. For now, I think we will just.
Hey, Michael,
yep.
If you don't mind, I'm sorry. This is Jim Cooney.
Okay.
I'm gonna try one thing. Lavonnie, if you are talking to us, we can't hear you, but I'm going to try to...
This line is now unmuted. This line is now muted.
I'm getting silence now. So.
Lavonnie, if you can try pressing *6 and then talking and see if we can hear you.
Hello?
Hi.
Hello?
Lavonnie?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Great.
I
Good.
can
We
hear
got
you.
All right.
Oh, you're on. Well, I'm glad I was saying good things.
I'm glad you were too, because I heard everything.
All right. Well, I'm happy you're on with us today. We weren't sure you were going to be able to make it, so.
Well, I've been really fighting with this. I don't know why. Rehearsal, it was very easy, and for some reason today it fell apart, but I'm on now, and I'm glad that I have the opportunity to be here. And I did hear everybody's presentation. They did such a great job. Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. Just a little sidebar about Norma Hotaling, because we started our entire initiative based on all the success that she had in San Francisco. So I just wanted to really put that out there in support of her, and she's definitely in my prayers. Should we just go right into our presentation?
Sure.
Okay. Just to give you a little background about myself, you got my picture and everything. Been on the police force for 18 years. This entire initiative with our rep school started actually in '97, we started thinking about it. And then we got together with Norma Hotaling. We got an idea of some of the things that she was doing to make her program very successful in San Francisco, and we had to tweak it a bit to make it palatable and successful here in Pittsburgh. We didn't change it a lot. The one thing that we did do is that, of course, we couldn't charge the same price. I think we changed the price, and basically that was about it. But just to get started, should I just tap on my slide and it will come up automatically?
Yep, you can just click on it. Yep,
Okay.
there you go.
Okay, there we go. I was working in an area called the Hill District of the city of Pittsburgh. And this area was chosen because a lot of the community leaders there wanted to take a different approach to the problem of prostitution. And we started out, it was a community policing problem-solving effort. We chose a neighborhood because there was a historical problem with prostitution in that area. And what I mean is that people from all over the city kind of knew that if they wanted to pick up a prostitute, that they could go there. So we enlisted the services of the community, and one specific group was called the Uptown Community Action Group. Initially, what we did is we conducted surveys. We went to every other resident in that area, in that community, and we just basically asked them, if there was one community problem that they wanted to see decrease, what would that problem be? And the majority of them indicated that they would like to see some type of work done on the prostitution problem there. We also had some surveys that was conducted in the jails because there was always this pervasive concept from a lot of people that, a lot of the women, they probably, if there were services provided to them, that they probably would not even get involved in those services because they want to be out there. And of course, I think we surveyed about 100 women in the county jail. We didn't do it, the police, but we had some of the social workers in the jail conduct the surveys. And we had a resounding yes that if there was something available to assist them to get out of the lifestyle of prostitution, that they would definitely take advantage of that. So that's how we basically began. We started the John School back in November of 1999. We actually hold all the classes, and we still to this day. And a church called the East Liberty Presbyterian Church is a huge community church that sits right in the heart of that community. There's a shelter there. There's all kinds of community programs that go on in that area. And we wanted to, just in light of all the faith-based initiatives that was going on at that time, we wanted to get the churches involved because the churches was the hub in this city of making a lot of social change. So we wanted to get them involved, and they definitely reached out to us, and they've been very, very accommodating over the 9 years that we've had the John School program there. The classes are held every other month for a total of 6 classes a year, as indicated on the slide. We have 5 segments in the classes. We start out at about 9, finish up between 3, sometimes 2:30. Sometimes it depends on if the announcers are a little bit long-winded, which we welcome that. The classes may go until 3 o'clock. We start off with the police. Sometimes it's myself conducting an actual assessment of what's going on, giving them the ground rules of the class, what they can and cannot do. We register everybody. We talk about the laws against prostitution. Street facts, that's Vice Squad police that come in and discuss how that, a lot of the Johns themselves can become victims because there's a lot that goes on in the whole lifestyle of prostitution itself. We have the health department that comes in and does like about an hour and a half of straight films of sexually transmitted diseases and what you could get if you participate in those type of initiatives out in the street. Not a victimless crime. These are survivors of prostitutes that come in and talk about their experiences on the street and how far they've come as far as getting through their recovery with drug and alcohol addiction. Neighborhood Concerns is the last segment, and these are community activists that come in and talk about how prostitution affects their community. We do conduct an evaluation at the end of the day, just to get some demographics of who we're actually serving as far as in this population. The RED program has been in existence for over 9 years. We've had about a little bit more than 500 participants, and that's getting close to 600 now. The sister program started in 2000, which grew into the PRIDE program. The acronym stands for the Program for Reintegration, Development, and Empowerment of the Exploited Individuals. PRIDE supports the survivors of prostitution with case management, drug and alcohol rehab, and it's just like a holistic wraparound services, a social services approach to breaking the cycle of prostitution. Some other things that we do is I forgot to mention that there is a fee for John School. It's $347.50. Every presenter who actually comes to the class, the police included, all volunteer their time, so that all of this funding can go back into programming to support a woman's struggle to get out of the lifestyle of prostitution. I just wanted to add also that the PRIDE program actually provides in- and outpatient drug and alcohol treatment for women, because a large majority of the women do struggle with addiction. They emphasize the post-traumatic stress model for therapy for the women. There is a Jane School. If there's a woman, and this is her first time actually being arrested for solicitation, she has to go through Jane School, and that's a series of services put together to try to stop this young woman from engaging in this lifestyle. The PRIDE program also does a lot of reunification after the women get through the services for a year or so, to get their children back, because a lot of times the children are taken from them because of the struggles that they encounter with their drug and alcohol addiction. They get employment services, GED services, housing assistance, and for those who do need it, there is mental health assessment. So basically, that's it in a nutshell, but I'm just kind of summing it up so I don't take all day, because I could definitely talk about this all day. But it was a very challenging initiative to get everybody on board. But when people saw all the positive aspects of helping women reclaim their lives, I think that was a sell in itself. That's about it.
Okay, Sergeant Bickerstaff, one of the questions one of the listeners had was, when you say Janes, do you mean women who are selling sex or buying sex?
No, the Jane School, we have the John School.
Right.
Those are men who are actually buying sex. Jane it could be either or. It could be a first-time offender, okay, because this is a first-time offender for the guys who are purchasing sex, because they're not allowed to come to the program a second time. So the first-time offenders that we rarely get make first-time prostitution arrests, but if it's a young girl and this is her very first solicitation arrest, then she can also go through programming just like the men to give them an opportunity to break that cycle. So this woman can do that also. We've only had a couple of women who went through Jane School, but that's women who are actually they're participating in prostitution. I mean, they're selling themselves, but this is their first arrest. So we're trying to make them understand the issues associated with continuing in that lifestyle. Since the men get, this is their first arrest for criminal solicitation, the women get the same type of treatment also.
Another question that came in was, how do you decide the cost of the REPP program?
Well, basically the cost is just really determined by the district attorney's office. It's $347.50. There's, I think, $2.50 is given back to the church for the use of the room. Each guy has to pay that, and then of course the rest of the money is put back into services to get bus passes for treatment and help with housing and so on and so forth. I think when I went to San Francisco I want to say it was about 10 years ago, theirs started out $500 to $600. I don't know what their program costs now.
The program had cost $500, and that went up through mid 2002. They raised the fee at that point to $1,000.
Okay.
But then they put it on a sliding scale.
Okay.
So no one is actually turned away because of the inability to pay, and some of the men do pay nothing. I would say about 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 guys pay less than $1,000. So the average that they actually get from each of the men in the program is $750.
$750. Okay.
Right. Now the work that we've done, again, it's not methodologically it's not perfect. It's really just descriptive. But the information that we do have on the price of the programs nationally, we found that San Francisco has the most expensive program that's in terms of a fee for a voluntary diversion program. Norfolk County, Virginia charges a fine. Their program is not a voluntary or a diversion. It's just a condition of sentencing.
Okay.
And their program, they charge a fine of $1,500. But those are on the high side, and the national average, as far as we know, is about $350.
Okay.
And the ones that are under 200 tend to have trouble sustaining themselves. Mm-hmm. Portland, Oregon had a program. They've had 2 actually that have come and gone. But the second program that they started, they closed it because of funding issues, but they were only charging $82.50. And it wasn't self-sustaining. But from what we know about the costs, once you get around $300 or so, it really does cover all the costs of doing the program. And now, was your program, the REPP, is there an explicit connection between the John School program and the Pride program, or for survivors, where the money
survivors, the survivors, we give that funding to them. That money goes to them directly. From
the John School, so the men pay fees or fines or fees, and that helps to fund the program.
It helps, but our arrests for Johns have went down considerably. We want to believe that it has something to do with the John School, but of course, a lot of that is driven by enforcement.
Right.
But just to give you some ideas of apples and oranges, I think the last class we had we had a class on Saturday. There were 30 guys. That was a very high number for the number of guys that we've been getting recently. I think we've been getting on an average of sometimes 10, 12 guys. But like I said, it depends on the enforcement side. I think out of that class, if you do that math, it's probably about $10,000. But for one woman to go through inpatient treatment, it's $10,000. It's about $20,000 to $30,000. We have about 65 survivors right now in our program. So,
how many did you say?
About 65 women in the Pride program right now. It's court mandated. They usually go through for about a year because they have to go through different levels of treatment to get them to the. But everybody's given a different amount of time that they have to stay in the program based on their needs. So I can't give you a whole lot about that because the young lady who runs Pride is not on the line now, but I do know some very good basics about the program.
Well, we have
a women are court mandated to the program. I mean, it's volunteer. If they don't want to come, they don't have to, but they're definitely, asked if they want to go through the Pride program to help them to get out of lifestyle, to get out of prostitution.
Well, we have 28 questions in the queue right now, but I think we want to make sure that Stephanie has a chance to present. We have plenty of time for her, and then I think after her presentation, then we can go back and just kind of walk through these questions as best we can. Does that make sense?
Definitely makes sense.
Okay. Do you have to go, Sergeant Bickerstaff?
Well, I'm not going to be able. I'm going to stay as long as I can, but of course, this is not all that I do. I volunteer for the John School.
Right.
Technically, I'm the robbery sergeant.
Okay.
So if there is an emergency, I did put a little note on my door. All the detectives know that unless there's a dire emergency, they're not going to interrupt the the conference call. But if there is an emergency, I might have to just jump off.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'll give a couple of questions that are really specifically for you that only you can answer, which is who runs the Pride program, the police department, and how many people have been involved?
The Pride program does not run the Pride program is not ran by the police department. That's actually ran by Code Forge White Deer Run. And for a specific number, I can't give you a specific number, but I know that we've had numerous women that has went through the program.
All right.
Yes, because we don't really run it per se.
Okay. All right. Well, like I said, there are 27.
But right now, presently, there's over 65 women in there. So I don't want to give a number that is wrong. So I can't say specifically, how many women have went through. Now, a lot of them have been court mandated. Some of them do not even make it to the actual class. And, of course, they go back through the system if they don't make it to the classes. But
all right.
I can't give you the specifics now. I did reach out. I don't think of anybody else I'm not sure, but I did suggest that maybe we would have the young lady who runs the program for Pride, but she's out of town right now, so she definitely probably could answer some of those questions if we want to do that, on a sidebar type of thing.
Right. All right. Well, thanks a lot. Hopefully you can stay till the end, but I think we should go to Stephanie Davis for now. Could you put the slide up, please, Jim?
Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie Davis talking to you from Atlanta, Georgia, which I'd love to describe a little bit to you. But first I wanted to applaud Harvard for having an initiative to stop human trafficking. It's aspirational, and it's bold, and it gives us a vision that, in fact, we can stop human trafficking and not just reduce it. And in terms of reduction of demand, I think it's great that we're having a program this afternoon that is focused on the demand and not just the supply, which is, as Donna so brilliantly described, is illimitable. There will always be girls, unfortunately, who will be vulnerable, so that it makes so much sense for us to this afternoon turn our attention to the demand for it and walk up that stream where girls are being thrown in to determine who in fact who is throwing them in. So I'm very honored to be here this afternoon. The city of Atlanta has taken reducing the demand of prostitution very seriously, and that has been the focus of our approach, which I'm excited to be able to describe to you. Just a bit about where I'm coming from. I have been in the violence against women movement for almost my entire career, in rape crisis and the battered women's movement, looking at why it occurs, the cycle of violence and the control and power issues that are involved in all of it, which clearly are very, very evident here. And so it feels like an extension to me of the work that I've done all my life in the field of violence against women and girls, and the issue of prostitution is clearly part of that conversation for me. I started, as you can see, at the Atlanta Women's Foundation in thinking about this issue, and realized immediately that I could certainly get people's attention by talking about the children who were being exploited. And to date have not been able to find anybody who in fact supports child prostitution, although there obviously are a lot of people who do, or we wouldn't have this problem. But they do it in a way that is underground and has been very invisible to the public at large. I was very privileged to be able to land in the office of the mayor of Atlanta, that is Mayor Shirley Franklin, who is herself an extremely bold and visionary leader. We are here in this city, which has attracted business, convention travel, and major sporting events, which are part of the culture that is the big wink that allows this to go on. And the other factors that I think have made Atlanta such a hub for prostitution of children and adults, certainly, is the fact that we are part of the Bible Belt, that we are the heart of the Deep South, where I think where there's repressed sexuality, prostitution can flourish. There are a lot of reasons why it goes on, and we know now that it's universal, that Atlanta may have been singled out for a spotlight, but I think that speaks more to the strategies that we've implemented to try to end it, to stop it, and not so much because there's anything particular about Atlanta, other than the fact that we are a nexus and an intersection for people coming through to have a good time. And as we know from our culture, for some men, that means buying sex. And it has been allowed to flourish here. It's been tolerated as part of the business that happens in the city, and of the lives of so many people who have been destroyed by it. So when we got started at the Atlanta Women's Foundation, actually, it was to provide services, certainly to change the laws in the state of Georgia. It had been a misdemeanor to pimp or pander a child, and now I'm happy to say it's a felony. So we were able to get that done in the early, I think it was 2002. And then when I moved to the mayor's office 5 years ago, I had a wonderful new platform with a leader, this wonderful mayor, who was very anxious to take this on. One of the first things Shirley Franklin asked me to do was to provide her with some research. And so I commissioned a study called Hidden in Plain View. Oops. Here it is, Hidden in Plain View, which is available if you'd like to download it. I believe it's about a 63-page report on a website, womensagenda.com, which is part of the Atlanta Women's Agenda, the initiative of the mayor to attack this problem of child prostitution here in the city. We learned several things from this study. One, that the geography of it, the mapping, when we started to map it with the help of the crime statistics, we could see that it was occurring throughout the community, not just in the poor sections, but in the very affluent sections and commercial districts of Atlanta where the convention trade, the hotels are that houses the convention trade here, and places where in the malls and certainly around the schools, but most obviously around areas of adult prostitution, which is often those venues for adult entertainment. Again, no big surprise, but the study Hidden in Plain View was a wonderful way for us to both describe the problem, to offer some case studies, and talk about the actual lives of the girls who are lured in, and the prevalence of child sexual abuse that goes on, that becomes the boot camp for prostitution, and how it becomes normalized in little girls' lives and teenagers. So Hidden in Plain View provided us with a great platform with which to develop a work plan, and approach certainly the Atlanta Police Department with this research, and the mayor, who understood that it was going to take raising public consciousness around this issue for it to change anything at all. And with that, we launched the Dear John campaign. It was just a couple of years ago that Dear John became a public education campaign that was both this print ad that you're looking at with the mayor of Atlanta, and also a 30-second public service announcement, which went on, and I'm proud to say, to win the Emmy Award last summer. And slowly but surely, we were able to find people who just came from all sectors of the community, from business, certainly from the faith-based community here, from throughout the faith-based community, who wanted to know, first of all, what they could do for the girls, which is the first response and an honorable response. And from the Angela's House, which was the first refuge for prostituted girls here on the East Coast, which we started here in Atlanta in 2002, there have since been several other safe refuges and shelters that have been certified by the state to provide assessment and crisis intervention. It's by no means enough. Every time we're able to open up a shelter, those beds are filled within days. So we know we continue. I mean, that reinforces that the wonderful human services that are needed. That again, that is not certainly not the answer. There will be an abyss of need until we can get at reducing the demand. So at the mayor's press conference, where she announced this Dear John campaign, Shirley Franklin very bravely came out as having been molested herself, and it sent an incredible message throughout this community that if it can happen to Shirley Franklin, it can happen to anyone. And the message was also, I think, that if it can happen to you, you can also go on to become the mayor of a major city in the United States. It was a very powerful message, and the mayor has been wonderful to understand that why it occurs and what needs to be done to turn lives around. So we started looking at the data and developed several strategies, not just a public education campaign, but as with every social marketing or social change strategy, you need to have several things happen at the same time. You need to look at the different ways laws and policies need to change, and how we do, and around the reducing demand, we are in the process of with Michael Shively's wonderful help, starting our John School here in January. We're hoping to open it in January. The organization that will be providing that is the Georgia Network to End Sexual Assault, an organization that has great history and a wonderful leader who has a background in curriculum development for anti-violence programs. Our John School, which will start out with a $300 fee, is a pretrial diversionary program, and will also include, as we learned from the 43 other existing John Schools in the country, it will have an aftercare component that will go on for at least a year, where Johns will have to check in on a systematic basis so we can see how they're doing. The other thing that has happened here in Atlanta is we've been successful in raising the age of employees of bars and clubs, so that of course impacted the many hundreds and hundreds of girls between the ages of 18 and 21 who are on the stages in clubs all over the city. In fact, Atlanta, which has a thriving adult entertainment industry, we learned that there were over 15,000 permits out for exotic dancers, and of that number, 2,600 of them were girls between the ages of 18 to 21. So as their licenses expire, they will be able to go on to something else in their lives and not be in this vulnerable situation. The other thing that has happened here in Atlanta that we're really proud of is we understood that Craigslist was a huge marketplace, as it is in many communities throughout the world, for the buying and selling of children. And we're able to, we wrote a letter, the mayor wrote a letter to Craigslist about a year and a half ago, asking them to please consider, it was a request, changing their homepage here in Atlanta to take, to be vigilant and take the erotic services section off of it. Craigslist immediately responded with the fact that their freedom of speech allowed them to continue, and that they had put to be vigilant. We know that this did not do any good originally. However, they made a couple of little changes, including a link to the Atlanta Police Department, which we were very happy about. So those are some of the strategies that we've been able to provide here in Atlanta, and are very excited to be able to share them with the rest of the world.
Could you say, since you were talking about Craigslist, and a couple of the questions that we have from participants are about this, could you say a bit about the recent development in Craigslist, that agreement that the Attorney General has formed with Craigslist?
Yeah, that was very exciting. As you know, Michael, there were 40 states, I believe, including the state of Georgia, that has requested Craigslist, and they have consented to require a authorized telephone number. Is that correct? And also a credit card.
Right. You have to. Yeah, I think for the first time, a fee is required to post something in the erotic services section, and they are required to register some contact information to post something. I'm sure other people may know far better the details than I do, but those are some of the developments.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah, one of the troubles with it is that as opposed to websites that are entirely dedicated to commercial sex, that Craigslist is a fluid system. People could post a dozen different ads a day at no cost, and that's one of the things that made it very attractive to people who wanted to sell sex. So I know Ambassador Lagon last May or March or so, he met with people at Craigslist and was making the same appeal, but I think they just couldn't hold up to the pressure. Too many people were just pleading with them to stop it, and I think they didn't like being called. Craig Newmark was called the biggest pimp in America, and I don't think he appreciated that. So, well, thank you very much, Stephanie, and all of the panelists, Donna Hughes and Stephanie Davis and Lavonnie Bickerstaff. We have several questions, and I don't want to play moderator too much in terms of weeding out what is good and what is not, but I'm going to have to. Some of the things I know have been touched on. People posted a question and it got dealt with later, so I'm going to just go through and pick some of the questions here. We have about 40 minutes. I don't turn into a pumpkin precisely 40 minutes from now, so I can stay on, but I'm not sure if everyone else can. So we have a fair amount of time. One of the questions is, what is the overall statistical effectiveness of shame-based treatment of Johns? And from the work I've done, I haven't seen any study that tells us one way or another whether shaming would be effective. Panelists, do you know of any?
I know it affects them. This is Sergeant Bickerstaff.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if there's been any, similar to what you were saying, if there's been any actual overall look to see if, because they were shamed and that they were affected and embarrassed, did they proceed to participate in that conduct again. So I don't know if anybody's ever studied it, but I do know that it does affect them. Because in the John School classes, sometimes when the guys are arrested, the media is there, and they take their pictures, and it is in the paper. Sometimes their names will show up in a community-based newspaper, and they emphasize to me how it was so embarrassing for them and their families. So I do know it affects them, but I'm not 100% sure if that means that they do not continue their behaviors. We don't get them back in our class, but I don't know if that meant that they've averted being arrested because they know exactly how we conduct our stings now. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Yeah, a couple of the questions were about recidivism, rearrest. One of the questions is, are there longitudinal studies of John recidivism? And the first study that I know of was Martin Monto did a study that was published in 2000, and he looked at Portland, and he did the best job a person could do with the data that he had, but the data just really didn't support any conclusions. There had only been 90 people that had gone through the Portland program at that time in the 90s, and there was a comparison group that was probably fairly comparable, but there were only 2 recidivists in one group and 1 in the other. They just simply didn't have the data that allowed them to demonstrate that. And as far as I know, no one's ever even attempted any kind of an assessment of reoffending among people who haven't had their identities published or been subject to any of these shaming strategies. The study that we did on the San Francisco program, we had statewide data on men arrested for prostitution offenses that went back to from the 1930s up through 2005. We had 2.5 million cases, And I'm not tooting my own horn by any means. What I'm doing is tipping my hat to the state of California, who had been collecting the data required to do a good study long before I was born. So we got very, very lucky in our assessment that they had statewide data. So what we were able to do is look at men whose criminal history would have made them eligible to go into the first offender prostitution program. We looked at reoffending. We looked at first offenses for the 647B offense in California. That's the soliciting for prostitution, and we looked at 85,000 cases that looked very comparable, and we looked at 10,000 cases in San Francisco where a man's first offense for soliciting occurred in San Francisco. And then we looked for the rearrest event anywhere in the state because we wanted to not get fooled by displacement effects. So if a person gets arrested in San Francisco, maybe they just take their business to Oakland or somewhere else. So unless they left the state for their further offenses, we were able to capture that. And so anyway, the upshot of our study was that there was a profound positive impact on rearrest for men that went through the John School program. And I do have to say that came as an immense surprise, not because I didn't think that the people were doing a good job in San Francisco. It's just that the idea that you could basically talk at people, no matter how good your intentions, no matter how smart things are that you're saying, we just didn't think that a one-day intervention was going to affect this kind of behavior. The research on offender treatment in general shows that interventions have to be sustained and intense, and they also have to have aftercare. And the John School method doesn't include any of those things. It's very quick, not intense, and there's no aftercare. So we really had to think hard about, whether it was a data glitch or a mistake, and we, beat the data to within an inch of its life, and we just can't make the effect go away. And it doesn't matter what the time frame. We looked for anywhere from 6 months to 10 years for reoffense rates and compared the San Francisco guys to the rest of the states. We looked at statewide trends to make sure that some larger trends couldn't explain it. We looked at displacement effects, and it just all came up the same way, which is that there was a profound benefit to having gone through the John School program. And the other thing is that, some people have said that, well, isn't it just the arrest and not the John School? The arrest itself, maybe that's the important event. And there is a study, it's a very good study by Devin Brewer, that looked at the deterrent effect of arrest. And his study found that there is a deterrent effect to arresting Johns. And they also controlled for displacement to other communities. And it still held up. It was a very strong effect. So it looks like there are two things going on at once, that arresting is a good thing. It is a deterrent. And once arrested, that on top of that, the educational intervention can be a good thing. Now, we only looked at one John School, so that doesn't mean that the concept has been proven everywhere else, because there could be something special about San Francisco's program. But, we did have longitudinal data, and it was solid, and, no one's, went through a peer review process, and a lot of people have tried taking hacks at it, but no one's really been able to find that there's anything, methodologically wrong with it.
Could I add a few things?
Sure.
This is Donna Hughes, and one of the things that we know from studies done in Sweden and Norway is that men who purchase sex acts can be divided generally into two categories, and that is the occasional user or buyer and the habitual buyer or user. And the occasional the man who occasionally buys sex is someone who only does it maybe a couple of times in his lifetime, if that. And then there are the habitual buyers, and they're the ones that are going back repeatedly week after week. And there are the occasional users are much more susceptible to the law, to being arrested, to changing their behavior, because it's not something that has really become a compulsion to them. And it may be that the John School with is reaching a lot of the occasional users, and that they are amenable to education. So that would be one thing that could explain why the John School is so effective. The other thing that I think that is effective about the John School is that when there are survivors that speak, it really disrupts the men's fantasies. They're not able to pretend that this is really sort of a voluntary activity, that this is the girlfriend experience, as the terms that it's used, that these really aren't girlfriends. These are women who really do not like what they're doing. The other thing that is sort of usually left out in this conversation or discussion about recidivism and so forth, and that is that these, to my knowledge, are only street arrests. These are stings that take place on the street. And to avoid further arrests, all the man would have to do is go indoors. And that's one thing that we need to consider, and whether that they sort of educate themselves and say, well, I'm not going to fall into the same trap I did before.
Yeah, well, that's clearly the last one that you said about maybe moving indoors. That's a plausible explanation, and but for that to happen, what one would have to conclude is that they learn something in the John School class that makes them go indoors at a greater rate than the men who don't go through the John School.
They wouldn't have to learn that in the John School. I mean, there's how many internet forums out there on where to go to buy sex, and they quickly probably learned that the stings are taking place on the street, and they know that they're not going to have women in the massage parlors or police officers in the massage parlors to arrest them.
Yeah, but the thing is, we're not comparing men who were arrested and went through the John School to men who were never arrested or anything like that. The comparison is arrested men, that have arrest only. So they've all been caught. They all share that experience of having been arrested. And in San Francisco for 1985 to 95. That was the only thing that was done with them. They just got arrested. Then in 1995, they started adding this condition where they are arrested and they go to the John School. So I guess the question then becomes the effect that we see where recidivism falls by almost half in San Francisco after they started the John School. What is it about that educational intervention that makes them go indoors, why is it that educational intervention makes them go indoors at a far greater rate than the men who are simply arrested? So anyway, there are a lot of other questions to get.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of other questions, but I think that we have to take those factors into account. I just want to make it clear to everyone that's listening. I'm a total supporter of John Schools, but I think that we always have to keep asking questions.
Donna, do you know the ratio of habitual users to men who are not compulsively seeking to buy sex?
I would have to go back and look to see, but I think that we're probably looking at around 80 to 90% of the men who buy sex are the occasional users, and the habitual users are only maybe 10 or 20%. This is of anyone who's ever purchased sex. But it's the habitual users, the ones that are going back week after week after week, that are keeping the sex industry and the pimps in business and are creating that demand for victims.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. One of the questions is, what are the main funding structures for self-supporting John Schools? And I guess the real short answer to that is that most of them are completely self-supporting simply through the fees. So the men are charged a fee, and that is enough to keep a John School going. Now, reaching wider than that, thinking about all the other things that have to happen, like the arresting, the sting or reverse sting operations, the screening, and all that is something that most of it would occur anyway without a John School program. So it's really hard to consider those things part of the program. But the fees support it. There are some places where they don't charge fees or they don't charge much. And in that case, it has to be subsidized by someone's budget, and it's usually a court's budget or a police department's budget or something like that. A couple of these programs, or one of them at least, is from a probation department. So it's really it's one of the interventions for probationers is they have to go into the program. Someone had a question about auto seizure policies. Says our city recently enacted an auto-seizure policy for men caught engaging a prostitute. They're suing the city, claiming it's unconstitutional. But with 73 other cities doing this, it appears it's not any resources available to bring to the city to combat this issue. I think the quickest answer to the question is that it's really up to the state courts to decide, what is unconstitutional. At least that's the first step. And California had about a dozen cities that were doing auto seizure programs for Johns, and the state Supreme Court found it unconstitutional, so the cities have suspended doing it. Washington, D.C. had a similar thing happen last year where they've suspended seizing autos for the courts to work it out. So, it really depends on how they're doing it. Now, there's one city, Easton, Pennsylvania, that not only was seizing it and just letting pay an impound fee and get it back, but they were actually forfeiting, and they were taking the cars and auctioning them off. And that ended up, they had to suspend that because they were really crossing the line for a misdemeanor offense. The penalty far exceeded the maximums for misdemeanors. Someone could lose a $20,000 or $30,000 car, and the maximum penalty for a misdemeanor may be $1,000. So, but as long as the statutes don't prohibit it, it's something that it's fairly common. Someone asked a question: are there John schools in Toronto or anywhere outside of the United States? And there are. Our study, our research has not really supported our studying outside of the United States. The two studies I've had have been within funded by the Department of Justice. But I know of there are 13 John schools I know of throughout Canada. Toronto's got one of the oldest ones. So Toronto, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Ottawa, British Columbia has several. Ontario has a couple. Halifax and Edmonton, and 3 other communities had them that are discontinued. I know of 6 John schools in England, and the Republic of Korea or South Korea has made John's education programs or John schools a national program. In the United States, the biggest program by far is the FOPP in San Francisco, and over 13 years they've had almost 6,000 men go through it. In South Korea, in 3 years, they've had 16,000 men go through it, and they have over 20 John schools throughout the country. So they haven't been at it long in South Korea, but they've been, they have a far more aggressive strategy than any other country, as far as I know. Anyone else want to chime in on that? Feel free. One of the questions is, and this would be a good one for Lavonnie, can any community member start an REPP, and is there an outline of the program set up to start?
Yeah, we do have an outline, which we would be very glad to share. But for the county of Allegheny County in our county where we are, the REPP program is the only one that we recognize here, where the police make the arrests, and they actually are mandated to go through John School. Maybe I'm not quite sure about what the question is. I mean, are you saying another community outside of Allegheny County?
Again, I can only see the question. I mean, the way I was thinking about it was that it was, can someone else besides the police department start one? And
I think that you probably would be the best resource for this answer, because I know you've studied them. I think there are, like you said, there was a probation officer or probation, county probation entity that started a John School. I know that most of the John Schools are started in collaboration with police departments, but
yeah, I mean the typical model, as far as I know, and I know a bit about 40 of the programs, you know, and more about a few of them, but the you know, typically the courts absolutely have to be on board in some way or another, or it would be hard to call it a John School.
Right, because you're actually mandating people that are arrested for an offense to actually come to the John School.
I think you need all the appropriate institutions lined up, but if the questioner is actually someone who is an activist and a community person, I absolutely think that pressure from the community to have a John School is very appropriate, and that leadership will have to respond.
Well, that's exactly what happened here in the city.
But in fact, one of the things I would add, I think one of the important things about starting a John School is not only just the impact it may have the men who are in it, but the impact that it has on the community. That people read in on TV that there are programs to target Johns. That's the same thing as sending out a message, is saying this is really not acceptable behavior in our community anymore.
Exactly.
And that has I think that has a very important effect also.
Well, here in the city of Pittsburgh, the reason, I mean, I won't say the only reason, but one of the reasons that made it very palatable to look at a John School was because the community wanted to do more and provide services. They wanted to educate the Johns that this is not acceptable behavior, and they wanted to give the women a way out of the lifestyle of prostitution, to let them know there are resources that are available to you. And the community was the main initiative. They were actually the persons who came to the police with the concept. I mean, they didn't know about Norma Hotaling School, but they felt that there should be something out there that provides education and treatment to people that are stuck in that lifestyle. And they were including men also.
You know, I have examples of all kinds of people starting these programs. One of them is Sergeant Anita Johnson in Waco, Texas. She served as the decoy in the sting operations, reverse sting operations. And she had seen, just firsthand working those, that it really was just a revolving door. It was, nothing much seemed to be accomplished long term. So she was watching TV and saw a story about the FOPP program in San Francisco and just started one. She just basically bulldogged her way through all the bureaucracy and just started it, and she's been running it since 2002. And there in Denver, there's a guy who is a counselor. He has a private practice. He's a therapist, and he created a curriculum for men who are involved in commercial sex. And it's really a stretch to call it a John School because it really isn't hardwired into any sort of statute or policy. But this therapist has worked with judges, and some judges will refer men into his program and say, you've got an issue, you've been arrested, and whatever other signs they look for, and they will send men into the program. A lot of the John Schools are actually operated by counseling centers or organizations that really primarily deal with survivors, but they have determined that, we can keep rescuing and supporting and treating survivors, and we will, but it's really kind of shoveling the water back into the ocean, because they just keep coming unless we do something systemic about the cause. So some of these types of programs, Catholic Charities has a couple of programs that they're involved in, and Magdalene programs.
Mary Magdalene.
So it can really, come for anyone. It can really be pushed forward by anyone. And I guess the advice is just full speed ahead, wherever you're coming from.
Well, I think that what is developing are different models of understanding what men who buy sex are doing. think of Norma's John School model. What it is, it's about education and what I call fantasy disruption by allowing the survivors to speak and talk about their lives. I'm a little bit, if I have to sort of place myself somewhere, I'm a little bit more on the side of that these men have committed a crime and they should be treated as criminals. And I'm probably support more arrests and starting to take this seriously, because one of my fears is that, or one of the things I see is that I think the John School is sort of a step that eventually what we learned with batterers is that just counseling doesn't help them. At some point, you really have to sort of start getting tough with them, and I think that that might be also the difference between the occasional buyer and the habitual buyer. They may have different solutions for them. But another model that is emerging is one that's coming more from the Christian community and the churches, and that is talking about sexual addiction. And the focus at this point is mostly on pornography, with pornography addictions, but then knowing that a lot of the men not only become addicted to pornography, but start acting out by actually going out and either molesting children or buying sex. So I think that we actually are seeing sort of several different models in how to address men who are buying sex, and we need to sort of look at the successes of all of them.
Okay, can I just interject just one little comment in regards to the punishment issue? I know here in the city of Pittsburgh, the guys are only allowed to go through John School once. And then after that, their cases are sent straight to the criminal court level. So they get the opportunity to be educated and to learn that, their behavior is not acceptable. But if they're rearrested, then they actually go through the criminal justice system.
Yeah, the John School,
I think that's the way it is in most places.
Yeah. The educational intervention, is, it doesn't have to be set up the way the first offender program, the first offender prostitution program has done it, which is a diversion model, which is, if you go to the John School, then you can get your case dismissed, right? And, that program has been criticized for that, especially in other cities that have adopted that model. But if they don't have something equivalent for the women that they arrest, involved in commercial sex, then there's an equity issue too. But I've heard several people say that it's really just it's just another way of letting men off easy, and I think that's a legitimate criticism. But not all of these John Schools are set up that way. In fact, the first John School was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, 14 years before Sage started theirs. It started in 1981 out in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it's a probation program, so it's simply a condition of probation is that the men have to go through this treatment regimen. Indianapolis has an interesting model. They have a red zone program where, they send the men out. They have part of it's an educational intervention, so they spend half a day telling them things, like they do in most of the other programs. But then the second half of the day, they take them out into the communities that have a lot of street prostitution, and they send the guys on work details where they're the ones picking up the used condoms and the syringes off the street. And Norfolk County, Virginia is also it's a condition of sentence. So they have to pay a lot. They have to pay court fees. They have to pay for an STD test, $1,500 fine. So it depends how it's structured. But I think what is probably worthwhile is that whether it's a diversion program or just a condition of punishment, that it's not a bad idea to try education. Maybe I would agree that I don't think it should be a substitute for or a way to get out of actual punishment, but in addition to some other things. I mean, the way before we got our recidivism results and we were assuming we wouldn't find an effect, we were still thinking that the program looked worthwhile because, for one thing, it's free. It is self-sustaining financially. And the thing that we couldn't understand is if these men are going to be arrested, how can you in good conscience turn them back loose into society without at minimum trying to teach them about the STD and the health issues, because these guys are disease vectors. They're biohazards, and it's a wonderful opportunity at minimum to do some public health intervention. All right, now we cannot get to all of these questions, but we will try. Here's a question: have ex-pimps, I suppose is the way to say it. I lost that one. They resorted themselves. So, what is the distinction between exploitive sex work and consensual sex work? Anyone?
Donna?
Donna, I think, or Stephanie, I think.
Okay. I actually don't think there is any difference. One of the things that we know from organizations that have been working with assisting women and girls to get out of prostitution for decades, and that is the harm that occurs to women in prostitution. Even if they are sort of in it voluntarily, although I think that's a relatively small percentage, or whether they're involved because of drug use, or whether they would be a victim of pimping or sex trafficking. I think that there's evidence that all levels of involvement in prostitution are harmful.
I agree.
Here's a related question. Do you think that the main problem is how sex is viewed in society? Isn't the root of the problem on how we are taught in treating the opposite sex? Big picture question.
No, I think it's a big part of it, but of course, and I don't know what part of the population actually engages in commercial sex in terms of how many men have, how common it is. I think that would certainly go to whether or not we can pathologize it or see it as a sociological issue. It's the most emblematic to me of the exploitation that goes on in society. I think what will be interesting over time is to see how, as women's equality advances, how does that impact prostitution?
Yeah, I agree. This is Donna Hughes. There hasn't been a lot of research done on men who buy sex acts, but we do know that there's tremendous cultural differences. In some countries like the United States, we really have a relatively low percentage of men who buy sex. But if you go to some places in Asia or even Western Europe, in Spain, for example, the percentage will jump up to 30, 40, even 50% of men have purchased sex acts. So it really depends a lot on the culture. There's some interesting study done in England that has found that over the last 10 years, the percent of men who've purchased a sex act has doubled as a result of the growth of the sex industry, the more normalization of prostitution, and the increase of sex trafficking into Great Britain has resulted in a doubling of the number of men who purchase sex acts.
I think what's important to remember is it doesn't exist in isolation from everything else that's going on in our culture.
Right.
I wonder whether I might add a comment just on those figures. This is Denise Ritchie. I'm listening in from New Zealand. I have done quite a bit of study, literature review on the issue of statistics. And I think the important thing is, even though we get hooked into percentages, some of the percentages that I'm looking at, and these are statistics that have been generally accepted by countries, but Spain, for example, 38%, Germany, 18%, Italy, 17%. Then you're looking at some of the Asian countries between, say, Cambodia, Thailand, you're looking at 75 to 80%. But even when you take these very small percentages, for example, in Germany, they estimate that some 1 million men use the services of prostitutes daily. In Italy, if you take an estimation of 17% of the male population, that still equates to some 9 million men. So clearly we're talking huge numbers globally.
Yeah, there's a book that is just come out. It is by I'm going to botch the pronunciation, but the last name is Di Nicola, And it's a book called Prostitution and Human Trafficking, Focus on the Clients by Springer Publishing. And there's a pretty good lit review where they basically compile a lot of the survey work that's been done in different countries. And in the United States, if you kind of score it, like, throw out kind of the highs and the lows and look at really the sort of modal responses, it looks like around 15% of typical populations in the United States will say that they've, purchased sex. I think it all needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because who knows, who's willing to admit that. I imagine it's probably higher than 15%. But even so, I think it's fairly normative behavior. I don't think it requires any sort of pathology, and it's certainly not just a tiny number of fringe, on the fringes. Well, here's something that we've touched on, but it's still, I think, worth asking. I think Stephanie, would be a good one to try this and end on it. Was regarding demand, what about the activities influencing the public through public awareness campaigns, school education, media, before they become Johns?
Well, again, it's that culture of tolerance that has been able to help commercial sex thrive in this country, is all I know about. So I'm thinking that public education campaigns to create the idea that there is, we need to treat each other with respect and dignity, and that everyone deserves that. Everybody, no matter what, deserves respect and dignity, and that it could be, your sister and your mother or your daughter, more obviously, and that it just is part of these are all of our sisters and daughters. So that if we build that beloved community, I think that ultimately will mean that prostitution will cease. And that's sort of the better world that I'm looking for.
Yeah, I would agree that we need a lot more education, public education, and awareness raising. Certainly, in a start in at least junior high school with 12, 13-year-olds. That understand the harm of prostitution, and that's part of challenging the culture. Young people, teenagers, need to hear that pimps aren't cool and that they cause a tremendous amount of harm to people. So yes, we certainly need a lot more education in schools.
And equal opportunity. I think if women were paid what they were worth, if their work was valued equally, that it might not be an attractive opportunity to look to the adult entertainment industry for to be able to support yourself or your family.
Well, this may be one of the last couple of questions that we get to. Here's a question. I would be interested in knowing how the presenters differentiate between prostitutes and victims of trafficking. It seems that most people are talking about prostitution and not differentiating between the two.
Okay, one of the things this is Donna Hughes, that I did a couple of years ago, and it's been in some of my presentations. They may be on my website that you could check. And that is, I went through studies that had been done on women in prostitution. The women were identified as women in prostitution, not victims of sex trafficking. And looked at their experience with violence, with threats, everything that had happened to them. And what I found was that a very high percentage of the women in prostitution, around 80%, would have met the criteria to be a victim of sex trafficking. Just by what they told us, because they had been beaten up, because they had been raped, because they had been confined, because they had been threatened with weapons, because their friends or relatives had been threatened. All the kind of things we think that that define sex trafficking had happened to those women, even though they were just seen as women in prostitution. So I think that there's a very high percentage of women in prostitution that would meet the definition of trafficking. Second of all, the one of the points that I made is that every state and I think just about every country in the world has anti-pimping laws, that it is a crime to engage in recruiting women for prostitution, in offering them for prostitution, in organizing a business or a house for prostitution, profiting from prostitution. All those things are crimes. And the majority of times, not all, but the majority of times, force, fraud, or coercion is not required for it to be a crime. Often in the United States, something like compelling is required, but I would think that compelling is not quite the same as force, fraud, or coercion. So we actually have a whole continuum of laws that say that someone is committing a crime if they are doing what we call pimping or sex trafficking.
And we haven't made a distinction between domestic and international in this population that we've been talking about today, which I think is critical as well.
Well, there is a question. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, can we ask who's making all the noise in the background?
Yeah, I was just about to cut in. If you're not speaking, please mute your phone by pressing *6.
Uh-oh, there they all go.
This line is now unmuted.
Uh-oh.
I think I just realized the danger of that instruction. Hold on one second. I'm going to mute everybody's phone again, and then the presenters only press, well, actually, Lavonnie only press *6.
Okay.
This line is now unmuted. This line is now muted.
Okay, I think we should all be on. Lavonnie, are you still there?
I'm here.
All right, great. Okay.
Can we repeat? The question was something about domestic versus international. I didn't hear.
Yeah, well, I think Lavonnie brought that question up. Or
Actually, it was me, Stephanie, and I.
Okay, Stephanie.
Because
okay.
we haven't made that distinction, and there are clearly issues around immigrants' rights and how people coming in who are trafficked in from outside of the United States are treated differently by our laws, often, or given protections. And I think it's created some schisms within the nonprofit community, certainly, as different revenue streams come down depending on who it is that you're serving. And unfortunately, we're getting divided up into whether or not you're interested in children, or you're interested in adults, or you're interested in international victims versus domestic victims. So I think there needs to be a way for us all to come together and learn from each other and certainly support each other.
Well, I think that's one of the things that focusing on demand does is it is kind of a unifying topic, because well it's clear that if you're trying to create interventions and an infrastructure to support victims, then you can have far different issues present themselves for international versus domestic, adults versus children. And the same thing with looking at the pimps and traffickers, that to deal with it and create the proper infrastructure, it requires making some distinctions like that. But demand, that it is basically one market as far as I can tell. Maybe some
John
people
is John.
Right, that the purchase of commercial sex, that there is a line between adults and children. There is a line between trafficked versus self-motivated, if you want to call it that, and between maybe domestic and international trafficking. But still, the key to the whole issue and the crux of it is that exchange of money for sex. And it really, I don't know that the distinctions are all that important in trying to tackle demand, because there are fetishists and people that do focus specifically on children, some of the demand, and some men that want this sort of variety of physical traits or whatever can create a demand, but it still really is essentially one market.
Actually, this is Donna Hughes. I disagree.
Okay, good.
Because we know that there are women and girls that are brought in for certain ethnic communities or for migrant workers. either migrant workers or people in certain men in certain ethnic communities want to have sex with women or girls that speak the same language that they do. We know that there are sort of massage parlors or markets that will advertise publicly and therefore soliciting men in general. And this happens, I know, particularly around Asian massage parlors. But then there are brothels that really are exclusive to the Asian community. So there really are different markets, and it isn't just one.
Good point. All right. Any closing thoughts? I think we have hit our end point, and Jim needs to have a minute or two to help people get out of this conference.
Yeah, there is one thing I wanted to add. It gets back to this domestic versus international issue that Stephanie brought up, and that is that there is a U.S. law called federal law, importing aliens for prostitution. If you import someone into the United States for purposes of prostitution, it is a felony. Force, fraud, or coercion is not required. And one of the things that I think that we need to do is we need to learn how many different criminal statutes there are against trafficking-related offenses. One of the mistakes that we've made is to focus very narrowly on the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and its definition. In fact, there's the Mann Act. There is this importing aliens for prostitution in addition to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And if we start looking at all the different criminal statutes, including the state ones in whatever state you're in, suddenly this debate about force, fraud, or coercion drops away because the majority of laws don't require it.
Great to know, Donna. Thank you.
Hey, I just wanted one little closing thought. Michael, you had asked me.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I wanted to mention to you is that our John School has fallen off a little bit since 2003. I think we probably have had less than 30 guys a year. The last class we had just Saturday was pretty big, but I did get in contact with the young lady who runs the Pride program, and she indicated to me that there has been far over 150 women who has received services through the Pride program. I know the number, you had asked me the number specifically, and I didn't know it off the top of my head, so I just wanted to throw that in there.
Well, thank you.
That's good. Yeah, thank you for letting us know. I think that's good because one of my concerns sometimes with the John programs is, as much as I do support them, let me be clear,
okay.
and that is that we're reaching out to the Johns and getting them a way to change their behavior, but it's a lot more expensive to assist the women, and they often don't have often are not diversion programs for the women.
Donna, the one thing that I mean, everything you've said has been so beneficial, but it's so much more expensive for the women.
Yeah.
The guys come in, they pay this fee. The expenses for the women, and we definitely want to meet those expenses, go on and on, because this is a lifelong struggle for them.
Mm-hmm.
Truly. So, I wanted to throw that in there, so I searched her down, and she was in, I don't know exactly where she was at, but she was out of town, and I had her go through her stuff and at least come up with a great number for her so that she would know that she had that with her. Right off the top of her head, she knew what it was, so.
Well, thank you. Stephanie, any last thought?
No, this was very helpful for me. I appreciated what everyone had to say.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Again, Carr Center, Kennedy School, Christina, and thank you, Jim, for making this work, because I wouldn't have had a clue. I can barely manage it when it's explained to me.
Michael, you did great.
Yeah.
Yes, you did.
I concur.
I want to thank everyone too, but I see posted on the bottom of the screen there is a link where I guess we